Okay, get ready, because this is a wild one. This time, we're going deep on a church membership request that turned into a total mess. We've got accusations of theft, a pastor refusing to preach, and claims of, are you ready for this, lording it over the congregation. It really makes you think, about where do you draw the line between standing on principle and just taking it too far.
Yeah. What's really interesting here is how such a simple membership request caused such a huge fight.
I know, right? So it all starts in Iowa. There's a church called Sovereign RPC, and they decided to disband.
Mm.
And then two of the members, Brandon and Alana Oostra, they wanted to join First Reformed Protestant Church. That's FRPC over in Grand Rapids, Michigan. By the way, Brandon and Alana are siblings. Anyway, it seems like a normal thing, right? People move, they need a new church.
Exactly. And usually churches in the same denomination, they're cool with each other's members. It's usually super straightforward.
Right, exactly. But then this guy, Dylan Altina, he's like an officer at Sovereign RPC. He sends this letter to FRPC, and he's accusing Brandon and Alana of some shady stuff with the church's money when it was disbanding.
Oh, yeah. And it wasn't just like, oh, they messed up the accounting or something. Dylan basically said they were stealing from the church, which is a big deal, obviously. And he didn't just tell FRPC, he sent this accusation to a bunch of churches, which made things tough for the Oostras.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's talk about making things complicated. So now FRPC, they're stuck, right? They want to welcome these new people, but there are these serious accusations against them. And then, like, it couldn't get any weirder, Reverend Nathan Langerak gets involved. He's the pastor of Second Reformed Protestant Church, which is another church in the same denomination as FRPC.
Yeah, and he came in strong. Reverend Langerak filed an official protest against FRPC accepting the Oostras as members.
A protest. Okay, so let's talk about this protest. Why was Reverend Langerak so against the Oostras joining FRPC?
Wow. First, he thought the whole thing was rushed. FRPC didn't have any period of approbation, which is like a time for the congregation to get to know new members, to see what they're like, and decide if they fit in?
So he thought FRPC was making this decision without the congregation, like they were just lording it over them.
Exactly. He thought that went against their rights, and it was a bad example to set. He also didn't think the accusations against the Oostras were taken seriously enough. He thought FRPC, especially because they had a connection to what happened at Sovereign RPC through Dylan Altina, he thought they should have really investigated everything before even thinking about letting them join.
So it sounds like he was really worried about the church staying pure, like keeping its integrity.
Totally. And that led him to do something pretty drastic. He refused to preach at FRPC until they fixed it.
Wait a second. He wouldn't preach over this.
Yeah. See, these churches, they often swap preachers. Like pastors from different churches preach at each other's churches. It's a way of showing they're connected. But Reverend Langerak felt so strongly about this that he couldn't do that with FRPC while they were, in his opinion, letting these sinners in.
Wow. So he was saying that just preaching at FRPC would be against the gospel.
Yes. And that really shows you what was at the core of his argument. He thought that accepting the Oostras, given the accusations, wasn't just messing up the process, it was going against the holiness of the gospel. He thought it was hurting the church's purpose and message.
Wow. So for him, this wasn't just about church politics. This was about his spiritual beliefs.
Exactly. And that's when things really start to get intense. This is the start of a conflict that would affect lots of churches and people.
Okay, so we've got this pastor who won't preach, accusations of theft flying around, and everyone's getting really tense. What happened next? Did FRPC just give in to what Reverend Langerak wanted?
Not really, no. See, FRPC, they had their own ideas about how to deal with this. They defended what they did. They said they followed the rules, and Reverend Langerak was overstepping.
Oh, okay, so basically a clash of personalities. And principles, too. It sounds like this was going to be a big showdown.
For sure. Remember how Reverend Langerak said FRPC was lording it over their congregation because they didn't have that probation period for the Oostras? Well, one of the elders at FRPC, Henry Camps, he really didn't like that.
Uh-oh. Sounds like it's about to get even more heated.
You could say that. Camps wrote something to the FRPC leaders, and he called Reverend Langerak Supreme Lord of the Church and the State. He even called him Lord Langerak sarcastically. It's pretty clear he thought Reverend Langerak was attacking FRPC's leadership.
Wow. Okay, so it's not just about the Oostras anymore. It's like a power struggle between these two churches and their leaders.
Exactly. And this power struggle, it started affecting everything. Like, Camps also accused Reverend Langerak of libel and defamation for saying those things about the Oostras, the theft and blackmail accusation.
Right. So he's saying because there was no legal case against the Oostras, Reverend Langerak shouldn't have said anything publicly.
Yeah, that's it. He said Reverend Langerak was acting like a judge, basically, and that he was ruining the Ooster's reputation without any real proof. Camps even talked to a lawyer about it.
Whoa, hold on. Now lawyers are involved. This is getting serious.
It does show how much they didn't trust each other. It's like this whole situation brought up a lot of hidden tension and problems.
And remember, all this time, Reverend Langerak still won't preach at FRPC. Can you imagine what it was like at those churches? It must have been so uncomfortable.
Oh, absolutely. And it started causing problems within FRPC, too. Some people agreed with Reverend Langerak. They thought the leaders messed up by accepting the Oostras without checking everything out, but others thought the decision was fine and defended the leaders.
It's like everyone had to choose a side. That must have been hard for people.
Definitely. And then remember Henry Camps, the elder who was arguing with Reverend Langerak. Well, he ended up getting removed from his position.
Removed. Wow, that's a big deal. What happened?
It wasn't directly because of the fight with Reverend Langerak. It was more about what he did after all that. So FRPC finally decided to take back their decision about letting the Oostras join. And their pastor, Reverend Offoff, he preached about how the leaders had messed up.
Okay, so he's basically saying they made a mistake.
Right. He told them to admit they were wrong and explain to everyone why they changed their minds about the Oostras. But Camps, well, he wasn't happy about it. He wouldn't shake Reverend Offoff's hand after the sermon, and he told him to take back what he said right there in front of everyone.
Oh, wow. So he's basically rebelling against the church's message.
Exactly. And doing that in public, that's a serious problem in their church. They saw it as him going against the church's authority and not taking responsibility for what happened.
But why wouldn't he admit he did something wrong? He was part of the group that made the decision to let the Oostras in, right?
He was, and he never changed his mind about it. He saw everything as a personal attack. Like, people were questioning his judgment. So not shaking the pastor's hand and demanding that retraction, that was like his last stand.
It sounds like he cared more about being right than about the church.
Yeah, maybe. It definitely seems like that was part of the problem. All this led to a big meeting with another church, Cornerstone RPC. They decided that just suspending him wasn't enough. They thought he was being unrepentant and shouldn't be a leader anymore, so they removed him.
Wow, so this is dividing churches and causing problems within FRPC. And it all started with a membership request and Reverend Langerak's protest.
It really shows you how strong beliefs can have big consequences, even if you don't mean for them to. But that's not even the end of it. Things got so bad that FRPC even postponed communion.
Wait, they postponed communion. That seems extreme. What was the reason for that?
Well, a few things were happening. First, they were still dealing with accusations against their leaders, and they were worried that having communion while that was happening would be disrespectful, like they might be punished for it.
So they thought they needed to fix things and ask for forgiveness first.
Exactly. They also needed time to figure out all the theological and procedural stuff that came up, and to get advice on how to move forward in a way that honored their beliefs and kept the church together. And then there was also division among the leaders themselves. Some still supported Camps, while others thought removing him was the right thing to do.
Wow, so this is affecting everything in the church, from membership to leadership to even their most important rituals. It's amazing how much impact one pastor's protest had.
It is. It makes you think about how much responsibility leaders have, especially in a church.
And it shows how hard it is to stand up for what you believe in, while also trying to keep things peaceful.
For sure. And we'll talk more about that as we see what happened next and how this whole thing finally ended, if you can even call it that.
So we've seen how this whole thing just blew up,
Yeah.
affected all these churches and people. Even communion was messed up. But what about the Oostras? Did FRPC ever go back on their decision to let them join?
They did. After a lot of back and forth, FRPC took back their offer of membership. And Second RPC, Reverend Langerak's church, they considered the matter closed.
So Reverend Langerak got what he wanted. But was it really a win? What did it cost?
Yeah, that's the big question here. Rev Langerak might have stopped the Oostras from joining FRPC, but there was a lot of damage. Hurt feelings, broken relationships.
Yeah, it makes you think. Even when you're standing up for something you believe in, you got to be careful about the consequences, especially for other people.
Exactly. And it's interesting to think about how people saw Rev Langerak's actions. Some thought he was brave, standing up for what was right, even when it was hard. But others thought he was being too harsh, too judgmental, even controlling.
Yeah, it's like his protest and refusing to preach. It made things so much worse. And it made people question his leadership.
Definitely. This whole thing really shows how complicated church leadership can be. Who gets to decide things? How do you deal with accusations? What about individual beliefs versus what the community wants? Tough questions.
And this is like a real-life example of how those questions play out.
Right. And we should remember, Rev Langerak wasn't trying to hurt anyone. He really believed that letting the Oostras join would hurt the church and the message of the gospel.
So he felt like he had to take a stand, even if it caused problems.
Yeah. And that brings up another question. When do you stand up for what you believe in? And when do you try to keep the peace?
It's hard to know sometimes, right?
It is. And in this case, things got really messy. There was a lot of pain and confusion. And there's one part of the story that people forget sometimes, the Oostras.
Oh, yeah. It's easy to get caught up in the arguments. But this all started because they wanted to join a new church.
Right. And they kind of got lost in all of this. We don't know a lot about what they went through, but we know they wrote a letter to Second RPC saying how frustrated and disappointed they were.
What did they say?
They basically said they were judged without a chance to defend themselves. Like they were put on trial in front of everyone. Their reputation was hurt, and they just wanted to be part of a church.
That's so sad. They just wanted a place to belong.
It really shows you that these theological arguments have real consequences for people. Sometimes trying to be pure and right can hurt people.
So as we wrap up, what's the most important thing for our listeners to think about?
I think it's discernment. Knowing what to do, both in your own life and in your community. There are always going to be times when your beliefs are challenged, and you have to decide. Do you fight for what you believe in? Do you compromise? How do you disagree with people in a way that's respectful and loving?
It's a reminder that faith and community aren't always easy. There are always going to be messy situations and imperfect people.
Definitely. And this story also makes us think about who has authority in our communities? Who do we trust to make decisions? How do they make those decisions? How do we make sure they're using their power the right way?
It's tempting to just say something is right or wrong, but this shows us that it's usually more complicated than that.
Right. And I think it also reminds us to be understanding. When you disagree with someone, try to see things from their perspective. Listen to them. Be humble and compassionate.
This deep dive has been a lot. It's made me think about personal beliefs, church leadership, the cost of conflict.
Yeah.
And trying to find that balance between standing up for what you believe in and keeping the peace.
That's what these deep dives are all about. They show us how complicated life is. They make us question what we think we know. And hopefully they make us think and talk about these things.
And with that, we'll leave you with one last thought. What if Reverend Langerak had done things differently? What if he had talked to the FRPC leaders? Or tried to find a compromise? Or even just waited to see what happened? Could all of this have been avoided? Or was it always going to happen this way?
That's something for all of us to think about. Our choices have power, and they affect everyone around us.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. See you next time.